I'm going to tell you something that most people in HR would never say out loud. Your culture should not appeal to everyone. In fact, if everyone who reads your careers page and job postings thinks your company sounds like a great place to work, then your culture is too vague to mean anything. The best cultures are polarizing by design. They attract the right people and they actively repel those who are not a good fit. A 2025 Gallup study found that only 23% of employees worldwide are actively engaged at work. So, 3 out of 4 people are either going through the motions or actively working against the company. And here's what I find fascinating about that number: most of the companies in that study have values on their website. They have culture decks, they have mission statements, they have all the artifacts of a culture without any of the substance. So, then how come it's this bad? That's because most companies have a leadership accountability problem. Today, I'm going to challenge how most founders think about culture. Because after 15 years in this space, I can tell you that the conventional approach to building company culture is fundamentally broken.
Right.
Hello and welcome to Organized Chaos. I'm your host, Nahed Kerala, and for more than 15 years, I've been helping startups scale their people operations across multiple continents, most of them in the 7 to 8 figure revenue range. And I have watched the same culture mistakes take down companies that had every reason to succeed: strong products, real traction, and a ton of money in the bank. But none of it mattered because the founders never treated culture as a serious responsibility. Before we get into it, a quick note on the Startup HR Operating System, my flagship course that is currently in early access. This course is the same playbook that I use with my clients to help them scale their people operations. I'm closing early access enrollments on March 31st. So if you would like to take the course for a test drive, you will find the link in the show notes. Now let's get into it. I need to say something that should be obvious, but apparently is not. Building and maintaining your company's culture is one of the single most important responsibilities you have as a founder. Full stop. And it starts on day one, not when you hit 50 employees or after your Series A, and not really after you hire an HR person. I hear founders say things like, "We'll figure out culture later. Right now, we need to focus on product." Or they'll say something like, "We're only 12 people. Culture will come naturally." That's really like saying, "I'll figure out the foundation after I build the third floor." Culture is the foundation, and everything else sits on top of it. Let me demonstrate what happens when you kick the culture can down the road. I once worked with a fintech startup at the 40 employee mark. The founder had a habit of making big decisions in private conversations with 2 or 3 people that he trusted, and then just announcing them to the rest of the company as final decisions. He had been doing this since the company was 5 people, and nobody complained because he had been doing this since the company was 5 people, and nobody complained because everyone was in the room anyway. But at 40 people, the damage was severe. Employees felt blindsided, managers felt undermined because their input was never solicited. And the founder had no idea any of this was happening because nobody told him, which itself was a cultural symptom. People had learned that challenging leadership decisions was not something you did at this company. That pattern did not appear at 40 employees. It was baked in from the first month. The founder just could not see it because growth was masking everything. It took us about 8 months of intense work to unwind those patterns. We had to redesign the decision making process, retrain the leadership team on inclusive communication, and rebuild trust with employees who had mentally checked out. The founder later told me that those 8 months of cultural repair cost him more in lost productivity and leadership time than any product delay or missed quarter he had experienced. And that was a relatively mild case. I have seen companies spend a year or more trying to repair cultural damage that was established in the first 12 months of the company's existence. Undoing a bad culture is 10 times harder and 10 times more expensive than building a good one from the get go. So let me be direct. If you are an early stage founder and you're telling yourself that culture can wait, you are already failing at one of your core responsibilities. Culture is forming right now, whether you are designing for it or not. Every decision you make, every behavior you tolerate, Every hire you approve is writing your cultural DNA. The only question is whether you are writing it on purpose or by accident. The founders who get this right are the ones who dedicate time early to define what they stand for, define how they expect people to operate, and then hold themselves to that standard before they hold anyone else to it. It does not need to be a polished 50-page culture deck, but it needs to be intentional and it needs to start now. Now, the second point I want to talk about relates to a misconception that I have the strongest feelings about. And I say this as someone who has spent their entire career in HR. When founders tell me, we hired a great head of people, they are going to build our culture, I push back really hard on that one. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of what culture is and where it comes from. Culture is the company's DNA. It is how you make decisions, how you treat people, how you handle conflict, how you deal with failure, what you celebrate, and what you refuse to tolerate. That DNA comes from the top. It comes from the founder and it cascades through every leader in the organization. HR does not create that DNA. HR builds the infrastructure that helps you scale it. Think about it this way. HR can design the best performance management system in the world. But if your managers refuse to have honest conversations with their team members, that system is useless. HR can build an incredible onboarding program that teaches every new hire your values. But if a new hire's manager contradicts everything they learned in onboarding through their own behavior, the program has already failed on week 2. HR can flag cultural risks all day long, but if leadership does not act on those flags, nothing changes. And I have lived this firsthand. I have worked in companies where I built exceptional programs and frameworks as the HR leader, and the leadership team did not follow through. The culture suffered despite my best efforts. And I have seen the complete opposite, where companies had very minimal HR resources, but the founder and leadership team were so committed to their values and the culture, it thrived. That tells you everything you need to know about where culture actually comes from. So here is how I think about this correctly. The founder and leadership team sets the cultural standard and they uphold that standard within their teams. Every single manager in your company is a culture carrier, and they need to be held accountable for that. HR's job is to build the systems, processes, and programs that make culture building easier and more accessible across the organization. HR designs the frameworks, creates the feedback mechanisms, builds the onboarding, the performance systems, and the engagement surveys, and so forth. HR also flags the risks and provides the data. That work is critical. But the accountability for actually living the culture, for enforcing it, for making the hard calls when someone violates it, that sits with the founder and every leader in the organization. So stop treating culture as an HR initiative. It is a leadership discipline that every person with direct reports is responsible for. HR supports it, but the leadership team as a whole owns it. Now, the third point I want to talk about is being ruthless about protecting your culture. This is where most founders lose their nerve, and it is where the most damage gets done. You can have clearly defined values. You can have every leader in your organization bought in. You can have beautiful systems and processes. But if you are not willing to fire someone who refuses to operate within your cultural norms, none of it matters. Your culture is only as strong as the worst behavior you are willing to tolerate. I watched a SaaS founder lose 4 good employees in 60 days because he refused to fire a VP of sales who was a serial bully. This VP was hitting his numbers, top of the leaderboard, closed the company's 2 biggest enterprise deals that year. But every person on his team was miserable. He belittled people in meetings, he took credit for his team's work, and just created an environment where fear was the primary motivator. Now, the founder knew about all of this. HR flagged it repeatedly to him, and multiple people on the team raised concerns. But the founder kept saying something along the lines of, "We can't afford to lose him right now. He is too important to revenue." So the VP stayed, and 4 talented people walked out the door. Now, let me run the math on that. Using the conservative estimate that replacing an employee costs 50% of their annual salary. The replacement cost for those four employees exceeded $300,000. Now, the VP's biggest deal that year was worth $280,000 in annual contract value. So the math did not add up. And I have news for you, it never does. But the financial damage was actually the smaller problem here. The bigger problem was the message it sent to the entire company. Every employee watched a known bully get protected because of his revenue numbers. What that tells your workforce is that your values are negotiable, that the rules apply to some people and not to others, that if you are a high enough performer, you can treat people however you choose to. The moment that message gets absorbed, your culture is dead. It does not matter what your values slide deck says. And I'm going to say something that might sound extreme, but I believe it completely. You need to be ruthless about this. When someone refuses to conduct themselves within the cultural norms your company has set, they need to go. No exceptions. I do not care if they are your top salesperson. I do not care if they are a founding engineer. And I sure as hell do not care if they are your co-founder's college roommate. A single person who operates outside your cultural norms will do more damage to your organization than you can quantify on a spreadsheet. So here's what actually happens when you keep a culture violator around. The best people on your team, the ones who have options and who are talented enough to work anywhere, they're the ones who leave first. They're not going to sit around and watch someone get away with the behavior that contradicts everything the company says it stands for. So your talent density drops. Then the people who stay start adjusting their behavior. They see that the stated values are not the real values. So they start operating by the actual rules, the unwritten ones. Collaboration decreases, trust erodes, and people start protecting themselves instead of working together. And once that rot sets in, it spreads really fast. I once worked with a health tech company where the founder fired their CTO, who was a co-founder and brilliant engineer, because that CTO consistently undermined the collaborative culture they were building. He made decisions unilaterally. He dismissed input from other teams and created a silo around the engineering department. The founder told me it was the hardest decision he had ever made. But within 90 days of that firing, engineering collaboration with product and design improved dramatically. Two of the engineers who had been quietly looking for other jobs stopped their searches entirely. And the company actually shipped their next major release 3 weeks ahead of schedule. That is what happens when you protect your culture decisively. The organization gets healthier almost immediately. People feel safe. They feel like the values are real. And they perform better because they trust that the environment they are in is genuine. So stop making exceptions. Document your cultural expectations clearly. Communicate them constantly. And when someone violates them repeatedly after coaching and clear feedback, just move them out immediately. Every day you wait, you are losing the trust of the people who are doing it right. Now, the last point I want to talk about is designing your culture to repel the wrong people. So here's where I'm going to challenge a belief that most founders hold without ever questioning it. Most founders I talk to want their company to appeal to as many talented people as possible. They write generic values like, we value innovation and we believe in teamwork and we are passionate about excellence. These statements, they describe almost every company on earth. They differentiate you from nobody and they attract everyone, which means they filter no one. Your culture should not appeal to everyone. Let me say that again because I really want it to land. Your culture should be deliberately designed to repel anyone who is not a good fit. Think about what your company actually values in practice, not in theory. How do you actually make decisions? How do you actually handle disagreements? What does accountability actually look like at your company? What pace do you actually operate at? Those answers should be specific, concrete, and honest. And they should make some people say, that sounds amazing. I want to be a part of that. And should make other people say, this is absolutely not for me. Both reactions are exactly what you want. I once worked with a logistics startup whose founder was deliberate about this. Their culture was built around radical transparency and direct feedback. In practice, that meant anyone could challenge anyone in a meeting, regardless of their title. It meant performance data was shared openly across teams. It also meant that your manager would tell you to your face if your work was not meeting expectations, and they expected you to do the same in return. They put this front and center on their careers page. They didn't bury it in some paragraph. It was just right there once you hit that landing page. It was the first thing candidates saw. They included specific examples, things like in our weekly team reviews, every project is evaluated openly, and every team member is expected to give and receive direct feedback on what is working and what is not. If that sounds uncomfortable to you, we are probably not the right fit. Their recruiters reinforced it in the first call. Their interview process tested for it with behavioral questions designed to see how candidates handled giving and receiving critical feedback. By the time someone got an offer, they had a very clear picture of what they were signing up for. But check out what happened. Their application volume dropped by about 30% after they rewrote their careers page and redesigned the recruitment process around this. The founder told me some people on his team just panicked, but the quality of hire went up significantly. Time to productivity for new hires dropped because people were not blindsided by the culture when they arrived. And their voluntary turnover in the first year of employment fell from 22% to 9%. That is a massive improvement. Early turnover is one of the most expensive problems a growing startup faces, and they cut it by more than half. So the math here is simple. Fewer applicants who are genuinely aligned with your culture will always outperform a larger pool of people who showed up because your job posting sounded nice. So here's what I want you to do. Look at your careers page, your job postings, and your interview process. Then ask yourself, would someone who is fundamentally wrong for our culture read this and self-select out? If the answer is no, you are wasting time and money filtering through people in your pipeline who will never thrive at your company. What's worse? Some of them will slip through. They'll get hired, and they will become the culture problems you end up having to deal with later. So be explicit about how things work at your company. Be unapologetic about it. Describe the actual day-to-day experience of working there, including the parts that are hard. If you operate at a high pace and expect people to own their outcomes with minimal handholding, say it. If you value deep collaboration and consensus-driven decision-making, say that. If you expect people to challenge ideas aggressively regardless of hierarchy, be very clear about it. The right people will read that and feel excited. The wrong people will read it and just move on. And that is the entire point of all of this. And this also extends beyond hiring. Your culture should show up in how you run meetings, how you structure performance reviews, how you promote people, how you communicate decisions, and how you part ways with people who are not working out. Every touch point should reinforce who you are and how you do things. Consistency is what turns a set of values into an actual culture. Now, let me bring all of this together. Culture is one of the most important responsibilities you have as a founder, and that responsibility starts on day one. Culture is the company's DNA, and while HR builds the infrastructure to scale it, accountability for upholding it sits with you, the founder, and every leader in the organization. You need to be ruthless about protecting your culture. And that means you are willing to fire anyone who refuses to operate within your cultural norms, no matter who they are and what they have achieved. And your culture should be designed to repel the wrong people. You do not want it to attract everyone. Be specific, be honest, but also be unapologetic, and let your culture do the filtering for you. If you take one thing away from today's episode, let it be this. Stop trying to build a culture that makes everyone happy. Build a culture that makes the right people thrive and makes the wrong people uncomfortable enough to self-select out. That is how you build something that lasts. Thank you for listening to this episode of Organized Chaos. If you found value in this, share it with a founder who needs to hear it. If you have a topic you'd like me to talk about in a future episode, then please send me an email to hello@organizedchaos.fyi, and I'll see you on the next one.